Welcome to Series 2 of Connected Tech Talks, ITS's podcast. We ran a previous series of these, getting started again. Today, we've got Toby Williams with us from euNetworks. Toby, tell us a bit about your job and what you do at euNetworks.
Thanks for the invite, for coming on. Pleasure to be here, albeit not in person, I'm afraid. So, I'm Chief Product Officer at euNetworks. In that role, I own our products and product strategy, infrastructure investment, and that is how we grow and expand our network, whether that's fiber, lit, new markets, new routes, etc. Then I have business development, so expanding and developing new market sectors, and lastly, hyperscale sales also works into me.
That's brilliant. And euNetworks is a business that exists to kind of connect data centers together, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I've been at the company 14 years, and a lot has changed in that time. But really, one of the enduring trends has been the growth in data center adoption, and subsequently cloud, and then now AI on top of cloud as well. So I think it's we've been really privileged to be right at the heart of that from a connectivity point of view. We've been solely focused on connecting high bandwidth locations since forever, and increasingly that's just really mostly data centers now. So the majority of our services have either one end or both ends connecting to a data center these days.
Yeah, and I think that's important. We're seeing enterprise infrastructure is becoming more distributed. We're seeing more data centers pop up. There's growth zones being announced left, right, and center by government. But at the same time, the power grid's kind of creaking a little bit, and these new DCs are struggling to get power. And then fiber connectivity is also the other lifeblood of any data center activity. And I think you look at kind of how the data centers themselves are sharing the load, and that's not just kind of locally, it's kind of regionally or across borders across continents as well. I think that's where you guys come in, and ITS and euNetworks have a partnership that we've launched recently, which allows ITS's partners to connect their customer sites to any one of the many data centers that the euNetworks connects across Europe. How many DCs is that now, Toby?
I think we're well beyond 600 now, and it continues to grow. It's a key KPI for my team in terms of adding new data centers. Our preference is to connect that directly onto our own fiber network with at least diverse connections if we can, if not kind of triverse or quadverse.
Hearing a lot about those kind of, it was always diversity was the word, but certainly in conversations I'm having here, a lot more about kind of triversity, quadversity. What else has kind of changed? 14 years in the role, or certainly in the business. What's changed most in that kind of enterprise connectivity space in your eyes?
The primary topic has been one of cloudification. So I think that we've seen enterprises migrate from the broom cupboard to private data centers in some cases, but then private data centers have moved to retail, and then along came public cloud. And I think we saw and continue to see a massive adoption of public cloud compute.
Yeah.
And that is sort of virtualizing a lot of the applications that used to be part of the telecom suite. You can now sort of get that over the top of fairly sort of simple telecom services. More recently, that sort of swung back a bit, and I think like the balance, the point of stability is around hybrid cloud. So part of your own infrastructure in private cloud connecting with hybrid cloud, with public cloud, sorry. And then I think, lastly, what we're starting to see now is sort of how does AI fit into all of that, which is a kind of another sort of disruptor, I suppose, a driver of change. But it's been quite a journey.
Absolutely. And I think there was a big kind of hype maybe 10 years ago, everybody moving to that kind of public cloud infrastructure. And then I think, you're right, businesses have pulled some stuff back. Do you think that AI kind of adoption will take the same pathway? So it'll be kind of businesses will move to kind of some of the big AI providers, and then over time they'll pull some of that back, make some of their own models, things like that. What do you foresee?
Yeah, I think, well, AI has got a slightly unique dynamic in that you've got new entrants really trying to muscle in and take share away from the hyperscalers, who are sort of the gorillas in the room. So you've got agile players getting ahead, deploying GPUs quicker, grabbing sites and power quicker, and really kind of bringing that capability to market quicker. So I think you've got that sort of constant change and kind of competitive tension in the market, which to an extent, okay, you've just got three really huge public cloud players and then some kind of sovereign players on the edges as well. But I think at the moment, it's a much more diverse landscape in terms of kind of the AI compute. So I think that sort of demands a bit of flexibility in the approach. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And how do you think Europe's getting on data center wise? I think you see the news, America, data centers the size of Manhattan Island being thrown up in Nevada or wherever. It feels like the European strategy overall for the whole of Europe really is a little bit further behind that. What do you see?
Yeah. There's a whole kind of patchwork of different sort of things going on there. I mean, underlying that, European power policy is generally much slower than the US, and deployment of new power generation and transmission is much slower. So, we have planning timelines that go out a sort of a decade, and data centers who want to pop up in 3 years. So, I think the kind of the first trend we've seen is actually adoption of a lot of brownfield locations. So, for the UK, it's kind of deindustrialized locations. And I think we see that across Europe as well. So places where there were factories that have been displaced, you've got all of the transmission and sort of transformer capability to be able to connect to a data center. That's good, and that'll get us so far. But I think even that's starting to become scarce where people really want it. So I think the kind of the second real trend that we're seeing as a result of that slow power planning is a much kind of wider proliferation of data centers throughout Europe. So what was kind of, we talk about FLAP-D, so Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin. I think we can see Milan getting added to that, but but now we're starting to see massive deployments in Spain. I think the Nordics, so Stockholm, Sweden, Finland, Norway. I think are really competing for a lot of compute and I think although they're a long way away from everything else, if you've got a latency insensitive use case like AI training, then I think they've got a really kind of strong part to play within that. So I think what we're seeing is just a massively more distributed environment than you ever get in the US, which for a very long time has been really concentrated in Virginia, but even there is starting to actually proliferate across the country now.
Interesting. And in those kind of deployments into the Nordics or into Spain or Milan, kind of Italy, is the power generation a factor? And in the Nordics, there's a lot of hydroelectric, and then and obviously got a lot more options for solar as you head further south into Europe. Is that a kind of consideration?
I think renewable power is almost a kind of a table stake requirement for cloud. I think from a sustainability perspective, that's the case. But I think, when you look at the Nordics, they've got great cooling as well as renewable. And then you look at Spain, and actually I think there's got a lot of wind as well as solar there. I think there's a few things. First of all, they still got a lot of excess capacity, whereas core kind of more Central European markets have been sort of used up or are much further down that road of being consumed. So there's just more spare now. Okay. But I think they've also got a huge kind of green, sustainable story. I think the last point is around power costs. And, power cost is really the number one concern of any data center operator and any customer of a data center. that kind of differential is really quite massive between the likes of kind of Spain and Norway versus Germany and the UK.
Is the UK the kind of highest price for power, or is Germany beating us at the moment?
I think the UK right at the moment. Obviously, it's a pretty volatile environment for power at the moment. But we pin our pricing against gas, which is interesting.
Absolutely. And do you think kind of some of the narrative in the world around data sovereignty, around sovereignty in general, kind of means that the European market kind of has to get this stuff done? And how does that play with the UK outside of the European Union in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot of geopolitical reasons why sovereignty is becoming more and more critical. I think we have a framework for consumer data privacy, GDPR, and actually that's common across Europe, but also the UK. And what it means is that customer data can't leave Europe as a whole. Now, at least for the UK, we recognize the rest of Europe within our GDPR regs. So you can keep your data within Europe and meet that fundamental GDPR requirement. Now, there are kind of more localized sovereignty requirements. We see some markets or some use cases, they can't leave the country. So, we are starting to see more and more kind of localized sovereignty requirements coming up. I think even for the US public clouds, they're really recognizing that sovereignty is here to stay, and they need to be able to meet European and UK demands for data that is guaranteed separate from their kind of global infrastructure.
Excellent. Well, I did see that in the news. What does that mean in practice for a customer? We'll chat a bit in a minute about the kind of partnership we've developed, but what does that mean for a customer that their data is guaranteed not to leave kind of European territory in getting access to those DCs?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that infrastructure is fundamentally separate and separated out from the global networks and global infrastructure, and that comes with guarantees that the data won't be replicated or accessible from abroad. So, yeah, it's really their move to address geopolitical concerns and ensure that they can meet the sovereignty requirements of customers in Europe.
And I think that fits really nicely with the partnership that we've developed between our two businesses. So the partnership allows ITS are a wholesale operator. We work through partners who then serve end user businesses, but those end user businesses may ask that channel partner to provide them some kind of link in the way you've outlined because of sovereignty, because of whatever reason. And what we've partnered to do, Toby, as you well know, is ITS partner can connect directly into euNetworks' a suite of data centers. They can access that sovereignty product if required, and they can take a direct connection from a customer site all the way back to any one of the 600 plus data centers you guys connect around Europe. I mean, if we look at that, what's the kind of friction you think we're removing for customers or our partners with that kind of product?
Yeah, I think we live in a very agile environment. We work in and operate in a very agile environment. So I think that whatever your IT or network strategy is today, it has to be adaptable. And I think in the past, it might have been kind of straightforward to buy a link from A to B and pick up that resource. But the point is, all of these different on-ramps and AI capabilities, they're distributed far and wide across Europe, and that's only accelerating because of power constraints. So, I think that you've got just a kind of a topology adaptability need, that kind of security that irrespective of where the resource is, that you're going to be able to reach it and ramp up and ramp down, I think is a kind of a key part of that. From a kind of partnership point of view, I think from my perspective, we're combining two best of breed operators who are complementary but do fundamentally different things. So, for us, we're a pan-European data center to data center provider. That's really our focus, is making sure that we've got those data centers connected with high bandwidth, reliable network, low latency, lots of routes, all of those kinds of pieces. Whereas, we're connecting into the ITS platform, which is for me a next gen UK fiber based access platform that can bring all of those enterprises to the data center from where they are. So, I think there's a lot to be said for focus these days, being good at what you do. I think in the past, you get telcos that have tried to be all things to all people, and potentially, you can do all of those things, but the question is, how well do you do them? So, I think I'm really proud of our service and our agility and, what we can do for our customers. And I think, ITS has kind of similar values and capability to that. So for me, it's a great combination.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think what we've seen with our partners, the demands they have on us are increasing, but we know where we sit too. So I agree completely with what you've said about euNetworks. I think you've built a brilliant business across Europe, connecting those high bandwidth applications, connecting those correct, the DCs that need that. Our focus has been to build an access network and some metro networks that connect those enterprises and allow them historically to access either the internet or for our partners, to connect that into their own network. But increasingly, customers are coming to us, or customers are coming to their supplier, which will be one of our partners, and saying, hey, yes, I need some internet connectivity. Yes, I need a network, but I also need to connect into these specific things here. And I don't want to do it over the internet. I want either sovereignty, I want some kind of guarantees on bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where our partnership kind of really does start to come into its own. I think for me, it's about kind of future-proofing as well. I think there's some demand, but I think the demand for this kind of thing's only going to grow. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it certainly is. Just from a kind of bandwidth perspective, I think, our volume product these days on Ethernet is 10 gig. That's what we constantly churn out. But, we're just starting to see adoption of 100 gig. We've rolled out in London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and Dublin so far. We'll continue to do that over kind of further metros over the next few years. The bandwidth is getting bigger, and the volatility, right? The desire to be able to kind of flex up and down and sort of have, a network topology which is more aligned to your business dynamism. Something that adapts and grows and supports your sort of growth as it goes, I think is kind of key to that.
That's it. Yeah. We're definitely seeing that. I think we've built our network in the last 5-6 years. It's on the latest technology. As are many other networks that have been built. We built ours to serve those businesses, but what that's allowed us to do is provide businesses with options to go from a contended product all the way through to an uncontended product without multiple truck rolls, without disruption that's existed in the market in the past. I think that aligns really nicely when we start thinking about the fact someone might want to spin up bandwidth to a particular application. They might want to spin up bandwidth to a particular data center to run some kind of AI training model. And they might only need that for a short period of time. And I think that fits in with the kind of the way you guys have built your products at euNetworks as well.
It is, yeah. I think, I think there's still a lot to go in terms of the adoption of really, truly flexible services. We're pushing out automation through our network, and you've got a really significant number of our POPs that we can provide a service and a letter of authority to our customers at the click of a button. But we want to continue to expand that. And then it's like, how do customers get access to that? So for us, we've been developing a portal capability and an API capability to be able to do both of that. I think that sort of interaction and that ability to engage with us is as key as the actual network automation.
I think people want that Amazon-style experience now, don't they, for everything? That kind of frictionless trade. We see that as really important for our partners, and I know a lot of our partners who serve end-user businesses see that as important. It's interesting that you've said that as well, but I think we're just becoming kind of accustomed to things being very frictionless, very easy to deal with, online platforms that just allow you to manage your own whatever it is, whether you're at home doing stuff on a platform that you've got for your house, or whether you're at work. And I think thinking about how that kind of connects together, it's interesting how you've talked about that frictionless trade. When you think about that with your customers, is there particular sectors that are really kind of grabbing the technology now? Obviously, the whole FLAP-D logic is key. Financial centers, is it finance? Is it everywhere? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that it's split across all of those sectors in terms of kind of early adopters, late adopters. What I would say is, I think kind of digital kind of transformation or automation is easier said than done. I think you need really good data. Because it has to be right first time. It needs to be hands off. And that means that everything is really data modeled and data driven. And core to that is having a business that doesn't do everything. We're certainly not all things to all people. So, I think having a kind of a focused operation means that we can have fewer IT systems, less IT complexity, and more kind of continuous systems with high data integrity. So, I think it's easily said, "Oh, we'll go to automation," but and kind of digital ordering. But I think the ability to actually execute that is really dependent on a high data integrity, simple operation model. So I think it's not that easy to do.
No, and I think those challenges will be ones facing those end user businesses that want to see the whole AI thing. All these data centers are there; they've got all this stuff in. But you're running a business, and you think, "Right, I want to do that." I was chatting to one of our customers, and they've put AI chatbots in. It's been great, AI voice chat. It's improved their customer experience no end, but actually to get there, they spent 24 months cleaning up their data in the first place because it just wasn't clean enough to get there. And I think it's a point. The whole AI bit's a buzzword, and it's more of an outcome of doing some other work. Would you say
it is? The kind of the digital transformation, actually, the kind of the whole data integrity thing for us. I mean, our internal experience is that we have great data in the core of our business, but as you sort of expand like AI into new use cases, you start to care about some of the data at the edge of your business that before was kind of okay. So, kind of like customer contact information, for us, you go through the process of going, well, how many of those contacts are still live today? And who has what role within the organization, and just making sure that like your contact data is really clean is kind of fundamental to a whole bunch of kind of AI in a way that, frankly, in a kind of a reactive telco context where you're kind of dealing with stuff coming inbound and salespeople are holding the hands of queries, just didn't matter so much. You knew who you were dealing with, you had the right contact details for them, but now you need to know proactively, these are the people that matter for these contexts. So yeah, I think that's just one example, but I think as you sort of expand sort of the digital environment within a business, you're going to continue to come across different sort of frontiers of your data where you really need to go through a big cleanup.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we talked before, kind of the whole hybrid cloud, some private managed link, and tying it back to the fact there's all kinds of bits of data that customer data is GDPR protected. Where do you think kind of security comes into the customer's thinking on whether they choose private versus hybrid now? There's been high-profile breaches recently, lots of them, lots of supermarkets and things like that, and then some in our own sector with Colt recently as well. What's your thoughts on the kind of the view of security from the end customer on accessing these cloud applications?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's kind of horses for courses, but I would say that we see a whole kind of spectrum of different security requirements. I think when you kind of look at IP, then the sort of the natural path for that would be Ethernet. You're going from kind of encryption over the internet, which is really flexible and low cost, but you don't get that end-to-end SLA. So something could go wrong with a service provider in the middle that you have absolutely no contract with, and you can't resolve that. So I think you've got kind of operational sort of availability risks, things like DDoS that you're exposed to. So that Ethernet sort of resolves. So I think even that just kind of basic move from IP to Ethernet, I think is a fundamental sort of security shift for some. I think we're also seeing what we call private connect, but as a dedicated DWDM backbone requirement between data centers, supporting a lot of hybrid cloud deployments. So this is for data center replication, data center migration, and connecting that public and private cloud edge together. So that's a completely off of Ethernet, off of IP. It's a standalone network. It's yours. It's your kind of DWDM. It's your metro fiber that we're kind of deploying. That's having huge take up across enterprises at the moment. And I think some of those enterprises further have encryption requirements on top of that. So we've been running encryption for a number of years, but actually a PQC encryption solution to the market. So that is a first generation quantum encryption capability. And we're kind of working with customers on that at the moment. Now, for some customers, they're actually regulated and will have mandatory timelines for them to have quantum encryption. Now, none of those timelines are right now, but they're all within the sort of the tech life cycle timeline. So if you're making an investment decision now, you really need to be thinking about how do I have a quantum encryption proof capability or roadmap towards that. So, I think, there's a whole kind of breadth of different sort of technical solutions there, depending on what the security requirement is. I mean, for me, I think when you take a step back and you look at the kind of the risk landscape, I think there's been very high profile hacking risks there, which has been private run, but is sometimes state sponsored or state adjacent. Now, I think that we are also seeing, per the sovereignty point, some actual direct third-party government or security service intervention risks that people need to insure themselves against. And then on a physical side, we've seen a few instances, like during the Olympics recently, of actual direct network sabotage. And so there's kind of physical network risks as well. I think when you kind of think about it, you've got the obvious security one is kind of confidentiality, making sure that your data is not seen by others. But I think the availability for me is a really kind of core point around risk and security as well. So the ability for your service to be, or your information to be available anytime is a growing risk. I think, you look at the UK, we're an island. euNetworks has, I think, 8 different UK to Europe fiber routes on different systems, whether that's our own sea cables like Scylla that we deployed between the UK and the Netherlands, or common routes like the Channel Tunnel. I think that ability to kind of have multiple routes means that you're kind of protected from potential kind of sabotage risks or Russian fishing vessels, as meets the news quite a lot at the moment. So
think, yeah, and it's the knock-on effect for the, you talked about a business being able to access its information, the knock-on effect for them in trading. I think M&S was probably the prime example where you couldn't buy certain things, and you kind of think, well, yeah, that thing's happened, but why can't I buy a chicken because that thing over there happened? And there's obviously a whole cascade of things that go wrong in a business when they can't access their information with everything so interconnected.
Yeah, I think those incidents I think have sent shockwaves through UK industry, at least, in a real kind of wake up call. I think the challenge is the risk or the threat landscape only ever kind of ramps up and gets more sophisticated. So it's something that we have to constantly raise our game around. We're ISO 27001 accredited, but that's our baseline. Frankly, I think we're a critical national infrastructure provider in a pan-European context. We've got a lot of the cloud environment actually operating on our backbone, and that is so important for us. I think having a secure operation is kind of top of mind for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. So when I chat to our head of security, he just terrifies me with all the things he tells me about. Just it's right for us to worry about it, because similarly, we're connecting things together for customers on our internet-facing products. We've now launched a DDoS product that customers can take to protect themselves against those kind of things. And I guess the kind of organizations that are jumping onto the quantum security products are big global multinationals who are trying to do big things. You might tell me I'm wrong in that, but in those global networks, you're going to end up with multiple providers. And do you think that creates security blind spots for an organization?
Well, I think it can. I mean, complexity creates blind spots. That's fundamental. The simpler your operating environment is, the fewer sort of different interfaces or edges you need to own and defend and manage. So I think any sort of multi-provider sort of landscape is going to lead you with increased risks around all of those different perimeters. I think in the connectivity world, we sometimes see customers going for a dual provider situation to try and give themselves supplier diversity. But when you get into it, actually what you see is that those two providers could well be on the same cable, in the same trench, or in the same duct. And all those paths cross as they're kind of going out of one data center and leading to another data center. There's kind of points of failure along there. I think one of the things that we are really kind of expert at executing on is committed diversity. So because of our great data, we'll be able to flag in our systems, this service needs to be diverse at this service. And an example of that would be when we put a span under maintenance, we can actually look at our system and go, well, actually, these customers have a span that is diverse of that. So we can't put these two spans under maintenance at the same time. Or we can kind of schedule the maintenance separately. If you have two providers, then we're completely blind to somebody else's maintenance schedule. So there's all of that sort of coordination that we can kind of deliver when it's within our control.
In which sectors is that kind of thing, that kind of service, that kind of experience most important for? Which of your customers which customer sectors are saying that thing needs to be a thing for us? It's the most important.
Well, I think fundamentally, at the end of all of our services is a consumer, and either that's a home consumer or a business consumer, an enterprise consumer. More often than not, it's the latter. We are a B2B organization, and really, it's in that B2B environment that service reliability and uptime is just becoming more and more mission critical. As every business is going on its digital journey, its digital capability is just becoming more and more core to its kind of value creation and what it does and how it differentiates and operates. So, I think we're seeing a growing sort of mission criticality environment across enterprise. And that is then cascaded downstream to service providers and to carriers, and then clearly kind of public cloud and other kind of AI operators. Everybody is having to raise their game in terms of availability and reliability.
Excellent. Thank you. We're getting a bit towards the end of the time we've got for the podcast today, Toby, and I think it'd be remiss of both of us not to talk a little bit more about the partnership we've developed. I think it's something innovative. I think telecoms is a sector that is certainly in B2B in my too long in this part of the sector is collaborated. Sometimes kind of thought about as co-opetition. You know, you might be going after some of the same customers, but really you need to work together. You talked before about shared routes. That's probably a key example, but I think we've kind of developed something really interesting together on this proposition. You're best in class into DC connectivity. ITS is best in class kind of enterprise building to demand requirement network and platform, and I think it's something in my eyes that's only going to grow as we go into the future.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you kind of look forward, the real enduring trends that we see, automation, latency, resilience, security, and that kind of proliferation of data centers. I think that focused operators who have their own infrastructure do a few things as well as they possibly can. I think you've got a better chance to really provide customers agility, adaptability, and that security that they need. So for me, I think it's a fantastic partnership from that perspective.
And if we were to get together in 2 years again, what do you think would have changed in the market?
Yeah, so I think AI is the really interesting kind of accelerant. We're still really early on in that AI journey, I think particularly in Europe in terms of the kind of deployments here. But really specifically, there's kind of the data center deployments, but then there's the adoption. And I think what we see is that AI is very much a kind of a use case by use case, process by process sort of adoption point within businesses. So I think 2 years' time, not only is the AI going to be that much more capable, but we're going to be much further down that road in terms of being able to create value and adopt AI into our processes. So I think that's kind of one piece. I think sovereignty is really a massive conversation for Europe right now with the geopolitical landscape as it is. I think it's too early to say whether Europe manages to execute on that, but certainly there's a lot of motivation and ambition to create more sovereign sort of AI and cloud capabilities that are really kind of discrete and European owned and led. So, in Germany, one of the largest cloud providers is Schwarz, which is part of the Lidl group. You have kind of OVH in France, again, French owned cloud business. And I think Mistral, another sort of French AI business. There's multiple European players that are kind of vying for this growth, and then we have sort of AI growth zones or AI gigafactories in Europe, where governments are trying to really organically underpin sovereign AI infrastructure. So that's going to be quite a process, and I think not sure 2 years is going to be quite enough for us to see the outcomes of that. But I'd really hope that for Europe's sake, we are much further down that road than we are today in terms of implementing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the high bandwidth capabilities always existed in the core of the internet in between DCs. I think for me, what I'm quite excited to see is how what the availability of bandwidth to homes and businesses around Europe, which is the best point it's ever been. You look back 5 years, and actually the bandwidth available to a lot of homes in the UK and businesses was poor. We fixed that. A lot of investment, a lot of activity from the incumbents and otherwise, and that's fixed. And for me, I'm really interested to see what kind of applications are developed between the advent of AI and the fact that consumers and businesses have access to more bandwidth. And I think for me, there'll be the enablement layers now there for those kind of applications that require all that bandwidth. So just quite exciting.
It is, yeah. I mean, I was in the industry 30 years ago, so had the, I guess, experience of going through the dot-com boom. And people often talk about AI is it a bubble. For me, I think there's kind of fundamental differences. Is that back then we didn't even have broadband, and so for all the promises of the internet, the compute capability, the home compute capability was really limited. The iPhone was a long way from being invented. And, so we didn't have 3G, let alone 5G, and we didn't have broadband. And all of that was a fundamental break on what the internet could really offer at the time. I think when you fast forward to now, we've got that fiber-based infrastructure to really enable the delivery of AI adoption as it comes on. I think the real kind of transformational dependence is on the kind of systems transformation and kind of process adoption within businesses, which is a matter of time, but there's no real inhibitor there other than kind of process transformation and the ability for businesses to drive that.
I agree. I think the promises of the dot-com boom came, and they just came later. And I think the iPhone was a catalyst. I mean, I sold mobile phones at the time, way back when. Yeah. And, you couldn't video call somebody before the iPhone 3G came out if they were on different network. And you had to be on a particular network. You had to be doing all these things. And the iPhone broke down those barriers and drove adoption. So it's going to be really exciting to watch. So listen, as we get to the end of the podcast, quick rapid fire round. So quick answers to these questions, please, Toby. I'm going to ask you 4 things, and then we'll have a little wrap up. So, biggest risk you see in hybrid cloud today?
Assuming you're doing it, I think execution, the right public to private split, the strategy to have something that's scalable, secure, reliable, but is also adaptable. Whatever you plan to do now is almost certainly going to be the wrong plan. So you need to be thinking about an environment that adapts.
Excellent. Thank you. What do you think the most underestimated metric is in cross-border connectivity?
I think the breadth of different routes available, just having a highly meshed network is kind of really critical to availability there.
And what do you think the biggest blocker is in European infrastructure today?
Well, clearly power at the moment. Yeah, that is something that we are running a tightrope between demand and supply.
And if you were a CIO in a business, considering your kind of cloud and connectivity strategy for this year, what would you prioritize?
Well, I think it has to be agility and adaptability. You have to plan, your plan has to be based on the assumption of change in a much shorter time frame than any sort of technology cycle that you're going to be investing in.
It's come across loud and clear in this chat around adaptability and agility, both in terms of multiple routes. So when something goes wrong, you've got something to fall back on, but also even in just the planning for the rollout of new technology or AI. Thank you, Toby, for joining us. I've really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you, anybody who's watching, for joining Connected Tech Talk Season 2. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you don't miss an episode. We've got some interesting episodes coming up on the podcast this season, and we want to hear thoughts and comments. Thank you, Toby. Thank you for listening. It's been an excellent chat.